You are listening to the Revolutionary Love and Resilience podcast. I'm Shelby Lee, and I am so honored to be here with you today. This podcast bridges the personal and professional, creating space for experts in the wellness and well-being field to be both vulnerable and share their deep wisdom from their years of experience. This podcast weaves trauma awareness, inclusivity, and inspiration for every single person to be able to heal, grow, and become who they want to be, to step into their full authenticity and expand their capacity to claim their best lives as they journey through challenges towards revolutionary love and resilience. Welcome, Revolutionary Love and Resilience followers and listeners. Thank you so much for being here. As always, I have a guest that I think you are going to be so moved to hear. Her name is Caitlin. She is a friend and colleague, and she is in Portland, Oregon. We met years ago. A friend of mine said, I think you're going to like this woman. She teaches about neuroscience, and she's a body worker, and she's invited us to just come learn with her. And we showed up in this old Portland building that I had been in. You know, I went to therapy there when I was like 8 years old. And it was quite an experience because we were talking about trauma and how it lives in the body. And Caitlin, her way of talking about trauma makes it so engaging and so easy to understand. And it just like everything she shares feels brand new and fresh, even if I've heard it before. It feels fun to talk about, and it makes a lot of sense to professionals who've been studying this for a long time and folks who have just dipped their toe in the water, or people who maybe today is the very first time you start understanding a little bit about how we carry trauma in the body and the science, some of the science behind it. She's going to share some and a whole bunch more. So I'm really excited to introduce you to her. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and then she can share more. Caitlin Capistran is a doctor of physical therapy who has spent the greater part of the last decade forging her own unique approach to healing the bridges that gap between body and mind. Early on in her career as a physical therapist, Caitlin dove deep into a study of manual therapy and the osteopathic traditions that manual therapy arose from. Through this, she began to understand how interconnected all of the parts of the body are, and she developed a deep appreciation of the innate healing wisdom within the body. In alignment with osteopathic philosophy, Caitlin developed a belief that the body, mind, and spirit are all interconnected, and through personal experience, discovered that to be profoundly true on her own healing journey. In her early career, Caitlin encountered many patients whose physical health issues had an emotional component. And when she discovered internal family systems, a modality for supporting mental health and healing trauma, she saw the possibilities of integrating it into her practice as a PT. Currently in her private practice, Caitlin blends IFS, internal family systems, with bodywork to help clients connect to their bodies, their selves, and the healing wisdom within. And I'm so excited about IFS. That was another place where we were excited to meet each other because we both love doing parts work so much and have seen the value of it over and over. So hopefully she'll share a bit about that with you today as well. Caitlin, I'm so happy to have you here. Is there anything I missed or anything else you'd like our audience to know about you and your work?
No, I think you nailed it. I loved hearing your introduction, and it's actually funny. I didn't know that building where we first met was your building that you went to therapy as a child in. That's a funny little fact that I didn't know before. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you know, it was like one of those brief assessments. It wasn't a weekly therapy, but it was like an ADHD center. And the amount of things I have done in that building, I've gone shopping at Pier 1, I've had coffee, one of my best friends works in the engineering department. There's just like so many memories from the last 38 years. So,
Oh, that's so wild.
yeah.
Yeah, but no, I think you nailed the introduction. And it's interesting just hearing you read that and share that little blurb about me. I was really getting to have a moment to reflect back on like what a journey I've been on for the last decade or so. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice to hear that.
Well, I really love, whenever we're talking about our work, I love how you light up. I love how it informs your own personal development and growth. I love being in your presence because you just bring such a compassionate and curious attitude to everything, to my own process, to the clients you talk about, and it's just like an ongoing, unfolding conversation instead of this like battle of experts, that it's just so refreshing to be in this navigation of mind and body and spirit with you as a colleague and as a friend.
Yeah, I love it too. I always love finding other people that I can just nerd out with and we can talk about the nervous system and yeah, all that fun stuff that we both love to, talk about and get excited about together. So I appreciate you being around to, embrace the exploration with me.
Absolutely. Well, today we're doing it a little bit differently because we have a whole bunch of listeners, and I want to know more about you and your own story and the journey that you went on, as far back in life as you want to go, that brings up these concepts of revolutionary love and resilience. So maybe some challenges you faced and what's got you here to where you are now.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So growing up, I just kind of like had what I thought was like a really normal childhood and all of that. And then, I went to school and I went to grad school to become a physical therapist because I'd always been just like, fascinated by the human body. Like since the time I was little, like I can remember being in the 6th grade and getting to look at pictures of bones and doing a little like anatomy study. And like that really just lit me up. So I always had that fascination. And so I decided to go to grad school to become a physical therapist because I thought that would give me the chance to really like dig in and learn about the body in a cool way. And it was when I was finishing PT school, I had one final internship left and I got put sort of by random chance. It wasn't even like one of my top choices as an internship, but I got put at this little clinic out in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut. And all of the therapists there specialized in manual therapy, which is hands-on healing techniques. And I just remember starting there and feeling so overwhelmed because I would go in, these therapists were such high level therapists that I would be in the room with them as a student. I had finished all of my, my education except for this final piece, and I felt like I knew nothing. I would go into the room with them and I felt like I was watching magic tricks when I was watching them treat their patients, because they'd walk in and the person would be like, oh, I'm having this shoulder pain, and the therapist would sort of ignore their shoulder a little bit and be poking around and then be like, oh, it's coming from your gallbladder, and then they would do something in the patient's abdomen and they'd be like, now try to move your arm, and the person would be like, my shoulder pain is gone. And so I was watching things like that unfold day after day and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail this internship because there's no way I can do what they're doing. So I would go to this internship during the day, just like trying to keep my head above water, just trying to keep up. And then I would go home at night and I would study my ass off. And I would go home at night and I would look at my anatomy books. And I would also do all of these little exercises to hone my ability to feel with my hands. So it would be like something like, take a piece of hair and put it under a piece of paper and see if you can find where the hair is, or take a quarter and put it under a phone book and feel for where the quarter is. If you could do it with a quarter, then try a penny, then try a dime, just to hone the sensitivity of my hands so that I could feel what these therapists who were mentoring me were feeling. And yeah, for part of that, I really thought I was going to fail this internship because I just didn't think I was keeping up. But actually, it was quite the opposite. They recognized that I had something in me. I had a little bit of aptitude for this work, and they just nurtured that so hard. And at the end of my internship, they ended up offering me a job. So that's where I got to start my work as a physical therapist among these amazing PTs who were just mentoring me and just nurturing this learning and growth. And so that was my introduction to manual therapy. And they were all trained in the osteopathic traditions of manual therapy, which the osteopaths believe that body, mind, and spirit are all interconnected, that all the parts of the body are interconnected to each other, and that the body has an innate ability to heal itself. And as body workers, what we're doing is trying to enhance that innate healing potential so that that can kick on. And that's what starts to help the person move better, feel better. And it's not us doing something to them or being the ones who are fixing. It's about listening to the body so that you can figure out what is it that the body needs in order so that its healing potential can come back online and restore this person to health. So that was how I got my start in body work, and how I kind of started to become aware of that there are even something called emotions. Like, I grew up in a place where people were really heady. I grew up in a little liberal college town in Massachusetts. And so there was a lot of people who just really lived in their heads, including my parents. So I was very intellectual my whole life. And I still love learning and thinking. And it wasn't until I started studying things and coming at it from a very intellectual way that I realized that we have emotions and that they actually can impact our body. And then that kicked off a big healing journey of my own, because it was me starting to learn this right as I was starting at this clinic. When I had finally gotten my PT license, I actually broke my leg. And that was when I started getting treated myself for the first time. I had been studying physical therapy and treating patients, but I didn't actually, I had never received any kind of body work myself until I broke my leg. And that's what got me on the treatment table. That's what got me to start feeling my body for the first time. So it was feeling my body through this leg, feeling that through my recovery, exercising, working out with all of these physical therapists as I healed. And I started to feel my body for the first time and realized that there was a lot in there that I had never been aware of before. And things in that process sort of came to the surface beyond just the broken leg. But I started having some hip pain and low back pain and trouble, my low back and around my pelvis. And so I continued on getting treatment from my colleagues for that low back pain and hip pain, which was, my broken leg was down by my ankle. So I started getting treatment for this new stuff. And what was funny with that one, while the broken leg down at my ankle was healing, I wasn't getting a lot of movement on my hip and my back pain. It kept coming back. I wasn't feeling like it was really progressing. And it was sort of the gentle encouragement of the therapists who were treating me that got me to consider that there might be an emotional holding in my low back and my hip. And they kept coming back to my ovary on that side. Actually, they said, oh, this left ovary just doesn't move well. It's restricted. And that seems to be where the crux of this tension in the pelvic region, the hip and the back is coming from. And they were treating the ovary, but it wasn't responding 100% to the physical treatment. And so I started to look at, well, what emotions might be there? And at that point, I was really not very good at feeling emotions or naming them or knowing what they were. But I could feel there was something in there. And long story short, what I ended up discovering was that they weren't even my emotions. They were emotions of my maternal grandmother that were showing up in my body. And so at that point, I decided I probably needed to go see a therapist. I'd never seen a therapist before in my life. So I found a therapist, and I go to my first appointment with her, and she said, "So what's bringing you in?" And I was like, "Well, I have this hip pain, but it's not really my hip. It's actually coming from my ovary, but it's not physical. It's more emotional, but they're not my emotions. They're my dead grandma's. Can you help me with that?" And she kind of looked at me and was like, "Oh, that's called a legacy burden." And turns out she was an IFS therapist. And in IFS, they have something called a legacy burden, which is when we hold something from one of our ancestors. And it was through that I started to heal. I started to really feel deeply into my body and get to heal ancestral trauma that was being held in my body, and beginning to open up to looking at like my own experiences and my own beliefs and emotions that were held in my body. And that like just kind of set me on this path of really believing that body and mind, when they get to heal together, you see the biggest shifts and the biggest changes. So of course that informed my work that I was doing with clients, and I ended up going on to get trained in internal family systems because it was so profound for me. And so now I bring that to the work that I do with clients. So that is kind of the gist of like what got me started here. And I still have lots of intellectual parts of me that love to think and learn, but I also have, through that whole healing journey, which was very uncomfortable at times, I now have a connection to my emotions and a deep, deep, deep sense of body awareness and connection and love for my body and all of the teachings that it holds for me. So if I had never gotten to do that work and gone through the discomfort of feeling those things trapped that were manifesting as physical pain, I don't think I would be doing the work that I'm doing today.
Wow, what a story. I have several questions, and
Yeah.
one is how did you make that link between kind of feeling your ovary and sensing into that to the, what did you call it? A generational burden?
Yeah, a legacy burden is what it's called in IFS. So that's a burden that we inherit from one of our parents or our ancestors or somewhere outside of our own experience.
Yeah. So how did you know that that was something you were carrying for your grandmother?
It took a while. It didn't happen quickly. But it was the support of the therapists who were treating me, and they were really good at sort of being able to discern that this wasn't just physical. So they were kind of, suggesting to me, and they're like, well, this isn't getting better at the rate we would expect it to get better if it was just physical. There's a holding pattern here that might be more than just something going on with the ovary alone on a physical standpoint. So they had sort of kind of suggested that, and I was trying my best to figure out what it was. And then the interesting thing was I kind of started trying to sense into it, to feel it a bit more. And I started having memories, but they weren't memories of things that had happened to me. They were actually my grandmother's memories. And I just had this this sense, this feeling that they belonged to my my maternal grandmother, who had been dead for several years at that point. And so I just kind of stayed with them, and then I went and asked my mom all kinds of questions to see what information she could give me about my grandmother, and she was really hesitant to share stories about my grandmother, but I kept persisting, and she gave me a little bit that sort of confirmed the memories I was having, but they were really uncomfortable memories. They were a lot of experiences, like painful experiences of trauma that my grandmother had experienced. And that's when I started going to therapy with this IFS therapist, who helped me to kind of uncover it and do more work around that. So it was like these things, I didn't go looking for them. They just like came in. They were coming in so strong that I was like, I got to do something with this. And so that's what got me to seek out my first therapist. And I'm so grateful that I got a really amazing therapist to help me through that process.
Yeah. And I love the way that you were able to kind of just slow yourself down and get curious and ask yourself questions and ask your mom questions and notice your dreams, that, gather information before jumping to conclusions. And it sounded like it kept coming back, and it then felt like something clicked, like this felt true to you.
Yeah, it really did. It was just like a knowing, of that is what it is. And a clarity with that, which felt really different than me trying before, where I was trying to figure out what was going on in my body. Like, why is this hip so tight? Let me try to like reason it out or logic it out and come to a conclusion. It felt really different when it was just like a knowing of, oh my goodness, this is my grandmother's stuff coming through me. I didn't even know that was possible, but it just felt so clear in a way that all of the heady sort of figuring out, logicking, rationalizing didn't feel clear. But that felt murky and confusing. Like I was guessing. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you're bringing this in here, because so many people, they'll have symptoms in their body or in their lives, ways they're kind of reacting in their relationships, and they'll have childhoods that, seemed pretty quote unquote normal and not a lot of intensity. However, if they're not looking at transgenerational trauma, it's possible they could be missing something really big. And transgenerational trauma is so real. And I'm just so glad that you were able and supported by the folks supporting you, the PTs, and your therapist, to look for that and to just get curious about it and see if it felt true for you. And it sounds like it turned into an incredibly healing process.
It did. And, I had lots of intellectual parts of my brain that were like, we got to figure this out. So I have my intellectual parts went and like researched all of this stuff. Like, is it possible to feel this stuff? Like, what is intuition? How does that work? How could I possibly know this stuff? Later on, they wanted to study epigenetics. So I had a lot of intellectual parts that did a lot of research in order to help me relax enough into like the possibility that this was real.
Yeah, I love
So
that.
it wasn't like this beautiful, smooth, graceful process. There were times when it was like me, like really just trying to figure it out. And it wasn't particularly graceful.
I don't know many healing processes that are.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, I'm curious because you were talking about opening to feeling your body and feeling more emotions. And I, as you know, on this podcast, I'm really curious about revolutionary love. And I'm wondering if that is something that you've experienced on this healing path, and what revolutionary love feels like and means to you.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. I really appreciate you coining this phrase, revolutionary love, because I've never heard that phrase before. I know it's coming from you. And just hearing that word revolutionary love really got me thinking a lot. And when I think of revolution, I think about like something that's radically changes. And so thinking about love and how I've had a radical shift in my perception of love over the course of my life. So I just appreciate the question for like what that's getting me, how it's getting me to think. And I think that the answer I'm about to give would have driven me crazy to hear somebody say this, like even just 5 years ago. But for most of my life, I had deep, deep, deep inside me a feeling of loneliness. And I would never admit that to anybody. It wasn't something that you would have thought looking at me, because from the outside, I'm very social and I like to talk and I like to be around people, and that's all still true, but there was part of me inside, or many parts of me, that just felt so deeply lonely, and were really craving connection and love, unconditional love. And I, at the time, didn't even, I knew that I wanted it, but didn't even know how to receive it. Like if it was given to me, I don't even think I would have been able to receive deep, unconditional love. And I used to get so pissed off because I was looking a lot for love outside of myself, like looking for it, especially in romantic relationships. And, so I'd be dating people and, looking for love in romantic relationships. And I was just kind of not sure why I wasn't finding it. I was like, why is this not happening for me? And I would get so pissed off when people would say, oh, well, before you can be loved, you have to love yourself. And I would be like, I'd have a part that would jump on and be like, well, screw you. Like, no, that's not true. Well, I don't think that's true. And I do love myself. I love myself. I think I'm great. I don't get why this isn't happening for me. And I used to just resent that, like, pithy little, quip so much when people would say that. And I would say, I don't think that's true, that you have to love yourself before you can be loved, because what about babies? When they come into this world, like, we just love them, and that's how they learn what love is. If everything's going well, they don't come into this world having to learn to love themselves before they can be loved. I was like, I don't think that that's how it works. And I would get so pissed off about that. And then the funny thing is that, yeah, right. So, yeah, I would really resent that. And then just in the past year, really, especially like supported by my own practice of IFS with myself and my parts, and maybe we'll talk about IFS more later so people can know what it is, but just by like kind of coming to a place of really accepting myself where I was at, and really loving myself, not for my potential or what I could achieve or my achievements, but just really be able to be with myself and be present and be in full acceptance of where I was. I started to feel more able to engage with the people around me, just feeling more at ease in the presence of others, noticing myself just like being more willing to like make eye contact with people on the sidewalk and smile at them. And I just started noticing these shifts in how I was feeling around other people and how I was engaging with them. And what's really interesting is that I started to then receive more love in my life as a result of that shift in how I was showing up. So that was the biggest thing that I realized. I was like, oh shit, like there is something to that learning to love yourself. And really for me was learning to like accept myself and love myself exactly where I was at. That did make it really a lot easier to then have more deeply loving relationships with people around me.
And I love how IFS work plays such a big role in that. You're talking about parts, like, and there was a part that was like, hell no, And it's like, okay, and can we love that part?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to look like anything other than just giving all of the parts space. And like by just doing that and giving them attention, that is love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do love that part. I still love that part that's like, hey, that's not always true. Think about babies and how they need to be loved. We don't need them to love themselves first. Like, I really appreciate that part and its willingness to question, these little, just short statements that people make and hold as absolute truth. I love the parts that question that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, well, I love that story. I love that example of revolutionary love and the reminder of, accepting ourselves as much as we can for what's right here and right now, not the potential, not the accomplishments. It's just like what is available right here and right now. And in that, you got to see that the people you're inviting into your life are reflecting that to you even more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the same goes for our bodies too, because a lot of that accepting myself was just accepting my body exactly as it was, where it was at. And that wasn't easy for me too, but through learning to really like love my body exactly where it was, especially that was especially challenging when I'd be in the throes of like a flare up of chronic pain or chronic health conditions that I've been struggling with, questioning why is my body not doing it right, or why is it not doing it the way everybody else's body seems to do it, those kind of things. And just, appreciating my body for exactly what it looked like. That was a real key for me too. Like learning to like love my body helped me also to love the parts of myself, all of the mental parts of myself as well. Um,
Mm.
so that was a really good practice to just get to be like, okay, body, this is what you're doing. This is where you're at. How can I support you here? Rather than how can I change you so that you will be something that I can appreciate and love.
Mm. I love that. And I'm wondering how cultivating this revolutionary love inside yourself like this, if it's impacted your work in the way that you are with your clients when they show up, with your patients.
Yeah, it really has. And I think the biggest thing it's done is just make it really easy for me to just love my clients exactly where they're at. When they come in with chronic pain or frustrations with their body's abilities, or, frustration with the way their body looks or things like that. Um, I can just see them and really appreciate them exactly as they are. Like, I don't need them to be different in order for me to really care about them and care about their well-being. And so I think doing that for myself made it easier for me to do it for others, and vice versa. Like when I could do it for others, I am showing myself that I can do it for myself and my own parts too.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I love hearing, the kind of space you hold for your clients, that no matter what they're experiencing, they are lovable. That
Yeah.
you can be patient with the process. You don't have to jump in there and try to fix it or figure it out, that there's a quality of presence that informs the care there.
Yeah. And, in IFS, they have this saying, all parts are welcome. And I really embrace that. And I really feel that way when my clients are sitting in front of me, even when they're like really struggling or really stuck. I love all of their parts and I welcome them. And I know that all parts of us, um, at some point in there, like they have good intentions. They just want to feel good, and they just often just want to be heard or be accepted exactly as they are. And so that's often like the starting point and the way into starting to feel better. Just accepting all parts and welcoming all parts.
I say that all the time. I did not know that that was an IFS phrase.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of the IFS mantra, but it's applicable everywhere.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about IFS. I want to hear just
Yeah.
like, what is it? Make a little sense of it for those of us that don't know what it is. And then I want to pick your brain about bottom up
Yeah.
and mind body connection.
Yeah. So I love IFS, which stands for Internal Family Systems. And how it got that kind of crazy name was the guy who created it, Dr. Dick Schwartz. He was a family therapist, so he was working with families and understanding how like human systems work together. And he was working a lot in his early career with people with eating disorders. And, it's kind of known in the family therapy world that if you have somebody in a family that's expressing an eating disorder, the eating disorder is often sort of the symptom of something bigger going on in the family. And you'll see when family tensions get high, maybe parents are fighting, their child's eating disorder will get worse, right? So he was working with that population a lot, and he would find often that doing the family therapy work was very helpful. But what he was finding is it wasn't resolving the eating disorder symptoms like 100%. He would find that like when, like the symptoms would improve, but when there was stress in the family again, the symptoms would start to come back. So he was like, well, I got to do this a different way. And so he just thought like, I don't know what to do here, but I'm going to really listen to my clients and see if there's any clues in what they're saying. And he kept hearing them say things like, well, part of me feels this way, but another part feels this way. So in the case of a client with an eating disorder, they might say something like, well, part of me feels like I need to be perfect all the time and do everything right. And I restrict and I count calories and I only eat certain foods. But then another part of me sometimes just feels so out of control and I binge. And he was hearing them say things like this all the time. Part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way. And so he got really curious about these parts and just started to ask more and more about these parts. Tell me a little bit more about them. And people were able to really share a lot about what those parts were and what they needed. So he started to treat those parts the way he would treat members of a family, and work with them that way. And so that's how it got this name, internal family systems, because it's our parts inside of us that we all have interact with each other much in the way that members of a family interact with each other. And what you find in people's internal systems is that when they're expressing a symptom, which could be, something like addiction or compulsive behavior or anxiety or depression or dissociation or suicidal thoughts or anything along the mental health spectrum, things that people might, seek out some counseling or coaching for. Those are all just expressions of a system that's a little bit out of balance. And often at the root of that is some sort of trauma, whether that's trauma with a capital T or a smaller t, something that impacted that person and one of their parts. And the system is just doing the best it could to cope and try to help the person, handle carrying the wounding of that trauma. And a lot of times the way our parts do it, it serves us for a little while, but eventually can sometimes create unhealthy behaviors. So I'll just give an example to make it a little more clear. So say somebody had a trauma as a child, like maybe they felt neglected or unseen by a caregiver, and they felt really alone and lonely as a child. If that pain of being alone and so lonely is so uncomfortable to feel, the part that carries that pain and that loneliness will often get suppressed by the other parts of the system. They'll say, this lonely part is just too much. It's going to overwhelm us. It's going to make us tearful. We won't be able to function if we feel this intense loneliness all the time. So they'll push it down. And then we'll get another part that'll pop up to try to help us cope. So anytime that loneliness that one part is carrying starts to come up, we have another part that will come in with some way of managing that feeling. So it might get us busy in work, and it'll keep us distracted by working really, really hard so that we don't notice the feeling of loneliness. Or when the loneliness comes to the surface or gets close to the surface, we might choose to drink or overeat or, go shopping or something. And we come up with all of these strategies to try to keep us from feeling the really uncomfortable feelings that could overwhelm us and overwhelm the system. And at the heart of all of these parts and their behaviors, whether that's drinking or overeating or racking up credit card debt, shopping, is they really, really don't want you to feel this pain. So they have good intentions, but then sometimes those behaviors, whether it's drinking or overeating or whatever, start to cause us pain in and of themselves. And so as therapists, as IFS therapists would do it, we, instead of saying it's not okay to drink or it's not okay to overeat or it's not okay to go shopping to not feel your feelings, we say, okay, well, what is it that the drinking part or the overeating part, what is it that it really wants for you? And welcoming that part in, really understanding it, getting to the part underneath it that carries that deep loneliness, getting to know that part, supporting that part, and then giving it the experience it didn't have. So if as a kid what it needed was deep love and connection from someone who really understands and could attune well to that young child part, we let the person's current self, their what I would call like the highest, wisest self, or when IFS they just call self with capital S. And this is the self is the healing component in this. You get to come from this place of your true self, and when you're in connection with that true self, you feel loving and kind, understanding, creative, courageous, compassionate. And that self gets to be with that wounded little inner child part and support it to give that young child exactly what it needed. And from there, that's where the system can start to reorganize so that those behaviors that were designed to suppress the loneliness are no longer needed. So that's kind of a little example. I hope that
that's perfect.
Makes it concrete. Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes it obvious how these various parts are operating and that they want something good for us, and there's ways to actually meet the parts and care for them so that the behaviors are actually also like really well intended.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love hearing that description. You're so eloquent at it. And it's interesting, you know, like with the tons of studies and trainings I've been in, I'm like, oh, that's part of NLP. That's part of Virginia Satir's work. Oh, that's part of family system, you know, and it's exactly how I work, but I was never trained in IFS. So it's,
yeah. And what's cool about IFS that I really love is there's a lot of permission to, like, you take the model and then you can bring in all of this other stuff, which is really cool. So, for therapists who are trained in NLP or, attachment theory or mindfulness, it's like you just bring those tools
know anybody
in.
like that.
Exactly. And you just bring those tools in and you give the parts all of that stuff that it's like, oh, maybe this part wants some mindfulness, maybe that would be helpful for this part, or maybe this part just needs to breathe or whatever it is. And so it's really cool because once you understand the model, it just gives you a framework to apply all of the tools that, therapists already have.
Yes. Thank you so much for breaking that down. It is, I think, going to be really beneficial for people to start relating to themselves, getting curious in this way. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
Well, we've got less than 10 minutes left, but I want to see if we could take a crack at some more science pieces. Like if you can just jump in with your inspiration around what bottom up means and why that's important and how you do that in your work.
Yeah, thanks for making some time to talk about this because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. And yeah, so bottom up work. So basically, there is what we call top down and then bottom up. And top down, when we think about mental health, is often what we're thinking about. And that means using what's at the top, our big brains in our heads, to influence what's below our bodies. So if you are doing some sort of mindfulness practice, that would be a perfect example of a top-down practice that people could do. So it's using what they know about like how to breathe to calm down their body, perhaps. But then there's also bottom-up work, which is basically when we influence the body to help shift the state of our mind, our mental state. And so a lot of us think about mental health as being sort of top-down practices, but I feel really passionate about the bottom-up piece because how we are in our bodies really directly impacts how we feel in our brains. And so that's all based on how the nervous system is wired, how the part of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which is the part that takes care of all the automatic functions. You're breathing when you're not thinking about it, the digestion that's happening in your body, literally everything that's going on below the surface that you don't have to think about, that's being controlled by your nervous system. and we can impact the nervous system through the body. So the body has kind of a couple of modes in the autonomic nervous system. There's fight or flight, which most people experience from, have experienced, and some people live there. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's rest digest. And rest digest is where we do our healing. That's where we can relax, repair damaged tissue, have positive relationships with other people from. And so that all of this signaling in the body is happening all the time to tell us whether we need to be in fight or flight mode, whether our organs need to be doing their fight or flight functions and our muscles need to be doing their fight or flight functions, or whether they can do their rest digest functions. So somebody who's in fight or flight, they're going to have a lot of tension in their muscles. They're going to be in a stressed breathing pattern, which is going to be a lot of an upper chest breathing pattern. Their body is not putting resources into digesting food and breaking down food. It's concerned with getting out away from the immediate stressor. So it's going to produce stress hormones to mobilize the body to get away from whatever the danger is that it perceives. And so we know that there's like a very physiologic response that happens when we're in fight or flight mode. And then conversely, when we're in rest digest mode, we can relax, we can take good diaphragmatic breaths, we can slow down, blood starts flowing to all of our digestive organs so we can break down our food. It's really easy to rest and get good quality sleep there. So that's all very physiologic. So sometimes parts of our body can actually get stuck in fight or flight. So I'll give the lungs as an example because this is one that people have probably felt. When we're in a stressed breathing pattern, we're doing these shallow little breaths, a lot of times like from the upper chest. And we don't get that full excursion of our lower rib cage and our diaphragm. And we kind of get stuck in this kind of inhale. We do a lot of inhaling, and that can really wind us up. So sometimes our bodies, if we've been in that kind of breathing pattern for a long time, will actually get stuck there where our upper ribs will get elevated. The upper thoracic vertebrae become really stiff, where the nerves that bring that fight or flight innervation to the heart and lungs come from. Our upper rib cage gets stiff. Our neck muscles get really tight and stiff. Our tops of our shoulders will get really stiff, and we can get stuck there. And we don't know how. Sometimes when we've been stuck there for so long, we forget how to bring ourselves out of it. And so that's where body work can be super helpful. It's basically just coming in to the body, recognizing, oh, this person is stuck in a fight or flight breathing pattern. They couldn't get themselves out of it if they tried. They could try taking they could just try doing mindful breathing all day long, but they physically won't be able to get themselves out of it. And then the body worker or whoever's supporting them gets to come in and help take the tension out of the muscle, restore the mobility of the upper thoracic spine, get the ribs moving again, help open up the lungs in the lower rib cage to restore this normal, natural, kind of more easeful breathing pattern. And as soon as that happens, the whole nervous system begins to shift. The person will feel less anxious, less panicky, the mind will settle. They'll get kind of tired, perhaps, really relaxed, and they start just having an easier time breathing without having to work at it. And so that's where that's bottom-up work, is when somebody comes in and helps the body remember what it's like to be in that relaxed, easeful state. And then once it gets there, then all of the top down, like maybe a mindful breathing practice or something like that, can actually be so much more effective.
Wow, it is so fun listening to you talk. I feel like we could talk about this forever. And I also feel like this is such a sweet little chunk of information to let people kind of percolate on and chew on, because for so many people, they've been stuck in the cognitive world trying to figure it all out and fix it just with the mind, and bringing this element of the body and the importance of bringing it into a state where it can rest and digest and integrate, just how key it is to really deep healing. I'm so happy that you're breaking it down for us like this.
Yeah, and I'd say like one little thing too is that like if somebody wants to do the healing work to heal from trauma and like the relational healing work, we don't have good relationships with other people. We're stuck in fight or flight. Like we're just not very capable of good quality relationships when we're in fight or flight. That happens when we're in rest digest. It's so much easier, more possible to attune to somebody else, to really feel them and to be felt ourselves in a way that allows like positive connections to be forged. So what I like about doing body work with people is it just creates some ease and some space in the nervous system for that possibility of getting into rest digest. To allow not only the physical body to do better, but to help relationally have better relationships with other people and with ourselves as we're healing and potentially doing our own work with our own internal parts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so well said. Well, I'm curious if to end, you have any brief practices you'd like to guide us through or words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with for those people who are on a healing journey and looking for support and more resources to moving through it in a way that feels really supportive.
Well, I'll say one thing that I've been doing with a lot of my clients lately, which I've been just really loving, is just inviting them to be really curious about their bodies. And I've been doing a lot recently with the breath. And instead of trying to breathe in a certain way, just inviting curiosity about like, where's the breath going? How's it happening? Is it in the front? Is it in the back of the chest? How do the sides of the rib cage move? What happens in the shoulders or the neck or the belly? And just starting from a place of curiosity and noticing. And then from there, doing some directed breathing where we just invite breath into different parts of the chest, like starting maybe in the front of the chest, then feeling the back of the rib cage and the lungs, like feeling the back lungs, which often get forgotten about, then exploring putting breath just into the right side of the lung or just into the left lung, and just playing around with exploring, inviting breath into those different areas. And that just, for me, makes breathing a little bit more fun.
Mm-hmm. I was doing that lightning speed as you were talking us through it. And I noticed as soon as I became aware of my breath in my back of my body, so like a deep calm came over me. And it's so rare that I remember the back of my body. So I'm so glad that you said that.
And you're not alone. That's what I see with a lot of my clients is they breathe really well into the front of their lungs and maybe even into the sides, but the back is constantly getting forgotten about. You know, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So just that. And if you're laying down or sitting, just feeling the surface that's supporting you, just, you know, allowing your breath to try to reach towards that and make contact with the chair or the ground can be just a nice way to invite some awareness to that area of the lungs, which is often getting forgotten about.
Thank you for that. So I'm curious, I know you have some ways that people can connect with you and a retreat that you're looking forward to. Can you tell us where we can find you and a little about the retreat?
Yeah, so people can always find me in my private practice at feelingcentered.com, and I'm in Portland, Oregon, so they can look me up there. And I'm co-creating a retreat with another IFS therapist, and it's going to happen out in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains this April. And it's a 3-night retreat, all inclusive. So the lodging, all of the meals are gluten-free, organic, vegetarian from the retreat center's biodynamic farm. It includes a soak at their spa in the mineral water soaking tubs that they have with infrared sauna. It's really beautiful retreat center. We have yoga available, and the retreat programming is focusing on just cultivating deeper compassion for ourselves. So it's a women's retreat, especially for women who just are feeling maybe a little burnt out, like they've been disconnected from themselves. Maybe they've been really working hard to do a lot for others, whether that's at work, with their families, their communities, and in just working so hard to support others, have lost a little connection to themselves. So we'll be weaving in IFS and doing some parts work, and we'll also be weaving in connection to the body, the breath. We'll be getting to explore our hearts and the protectors of our hearts, both in our bodies and, the parts of us that do the protecting of the heart as well. So it's going to be really lovely. So it's called Circles of Compassion. If people want to check that out, the website is circles-of-compassion.com. So that's happening this April.
I want to come. That sounds incredible. And Colorado is always epic. So you guys are so much fun. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for letting me share that, because I've been really excited about creating the content for that. So it's something that's really, on my mind and on my heart a lot these days.
Well, Caitlin, thank you so much. This is exciting. I really am so happy to have gotten to talk with you and hear a bit more of your story that I didn't know, and download and get nerdy with you around a lot more science, which I think will be really helpful for a lot of people. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a beautiful evening.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you so much for being part of this show and being part of this love revolution. If you love this podcast, please share it with your people and leave a 5-star review so that we can get the word out. If you're a practitioner or on your own healing journey, head on over and check out creatingsaferspace.com, which is one of my passion projects and is open for enrollment now. You'll get access to it the moment you sign up. Or join my mailing list for all sorts of revolutionary love and trauma-aware support at shelby-lee.com. See you next episode.